You have been outspoken on the subject of deficits and that we really need to get our arms around. I'm going to put up a chart. You won't be able to see it, but you know basically the trend shows that the projections now for the federal deficit have gone up given the combination of the tax cuts and the budget plan. How concerned are people like you and your colleagues up on Capitol Hill about what's going on with the deficit and the increased borrowing that will come with it?
Well, I hope everybody is concerned about this situation. We know that as debt-GDP ratios go higher and higher, that at some point there's a breaking point. We look at a debt-to-GDP ratio right now in a decade or so that reaches 300-some%. That's sort of an economic crisis. It's a collapse as the government chases for finite resources, tries to find the money it needs to finance its debt, to finance ever-increasing interest rates. It competes with the private sector for those scarce resources. It creates manipulations of our monetary policy to the degrees that we probably haven't even seen yet. And we've seen considerable manipulation. So I think it's a very big concern that we simply have to get our hands around. And if we don't, that will be one of the biggest shortfallings this Congress, any Congress, has ever had to future generations.
So we have to get our arms around it, but who's going to lead us in that process? We have the president come out with a budget plan yesterday that calls for, I believe it's 2% reduction in non-discretionary after this coming year. But no one seems to believe that's actually going to happen. Does Congress have the wherewithal to actually make those kinds of cuts?
Well, this is one of the reasons why I support a balanced budget amendment. I believe this is exactly why Congress needs to, Democrats and Republicans are going to have to do this together, come together to pass a balanced budget amendment at the federal level. It's one of the most critical things that we could do, that we could also couple that with economic growth policies that would grow our economy. We're not going to cut our way alone out of this challenge that we have. It's economic growth. It's taking our foot off the throat of the American economy through regulatory reductions, but it's also making sure that Congress has some guardrails when it comes to spending, and that's a balanced budget amendment.
When we've had this sort of problem in the past, Senator, as you know, there were some creatures called bond vigilantes that came up. The bond market basically said, we're not going to put up with this anymore, and there are some pretty severe and ugly consequences of that. Do you think it's possible for us, leadership and all of us, to actually take steps now that avoid that sort of cliff?
Well, yeah, we have to, and I think that's what's important about the state conversations about passing a balanced budget amendment at the state level, trying to force it upon the federal government. You have that kind of movement that's beginning. You have the regular notices that we receive from the rating agencies talking about their concern over our national debt and what it could mean to interest rates, what it could mean to future borrowing. Look, the president's budget does focus a lot on this two-penny plan, I think is what he calls it, but it also talks about how by 2030 something that we'll start seeing GDP, at least the debt held by the public, decreasing significantly as a percentage of GDP. But that's a decade plus from now. We have to do better than that. And I think smart spending reductions, duplications in government that ought to be eliminated. There's billions and billions of dollars in programs that one agency of government is copying another agency of government. How can we eliminate those hundreds plus billions of dollars? What can we do to spur economic growth? And how do we pass a balanced budget amendment? Those are all part of the solution that we have to address.
Well, and Senator, it's not clear to a lot of us that we're done yet. I mean, we still have the infrastructure plan that just came out yesterday as well. I'm going to quote now from the president, who tweeted out this morning. This is what he had to say. He said, "Our infrastructure plan has been put forward and has received great reviews by everyone except, of course, the Democrats. After many years, we have taken care of our military. Now we have to fix our roads, bridges, tunnels, airports, and more bipartisan deal with the Democrats." So everybody thinks we've got to fix our roads and bridges and tunnels. No, disagree with that. But that's going to be even more money. Is there money really to spend on infrastructure at this point?
Well, look, I think infrastructure is one of the very important things that we can. A lot of it is funded by user fees. There's partnerships that we can enter into with the states for state-funded programs with the federal government. I believe the president's plan sets aside, at least in the budget that he released a couple days ago, about $200 billion in infrastructure spending that would include money for rural infrastructure, include money for private activity bonds and partnerships. But again, that's the biggest challenge, and I said that on the State of the Union night when he talked about the $1.5 trillion infrastructure plan matched by another $1.5 trillion. That this will be the biggest sort of challenge, is the devil in the detail moment when it comes to infrastructure and how we're going to pay for it.
Senator, you mentioned user fees. Let's talk just for a moment about that. Isn't one simple fix simply to increase the gas tax? It hasn't been increased in 25 years now. Doesn't it make sense to increase the gas tax to help build some of those roads and tunnels and bridges?
Some people may be supportive of that. I don't support that at this point. I think one of the concerns I have is how we're moving away from a gas-based economy. You look at the number of vehicles that are entering the system that are electric-based, and they don't pay a gas tax. And as more and more people buy electric vehicles, as more and more vehicles have increased efficiencies, they're going to be paying less gas tax. So I think we have to figure out more creative ways to fund our national infrastructure and get away from a gas tax, because it is a declining source of revenue for decades to come. And that's exactly the way people want it to be as they look for more fuel efficiency vehicles and as they look for alternatives to fossil fuel transportation.
So briefly here at the end, let me ask you to put a different hat on, the hat that says I want to keep the Senate in the majority, the Republicans in the majority up in the Senate. Is there any truth to the reports that, in fact, people are trying to persuade Bob Corker to run again, and he might be inclined to do that?
You'd have to ask Bob Corker that. What I do know, though, is around the country, the tax cut bill is looking good when it comes to helping our candidates around the country. People who voted against the tax cut bill are going to have to explain to the American people why they opposed wage increases, why they opposed higher wages, bonuses, why they opposed investments in new capital dollars coming to this country. So this is one of the things that I think voters are going to make a decision on in 2018. They're very excited about. That's the reason they're going to vote for a new Republican majority. And it's one of those things I think that's going to speak very well for our opportunities for American growth.